A successful interview is key to solving cases of abuse and crimes involving people living with intellectual and developmental disabilities.
No matter who it is or what they've faced, it's important to reaffirm to them, to tell them that you understand a bad thing has happened to them and that you're going to try and help them get through it.
You need to listen. Be patient. Look for the subtle and not so subtle signs, and approach cases with empathy to really understand the challenges the people we serve are facing.
We are meeting crime victims on the worst day of their lives and asking them to tell us about it. For many of these victims, the person who perpetrated these crimes is a family member or caregiver that this victim is deeply connected to. I have been in many interviews with individuals who have intellectual and developmental disabilities where the person was willing to have taken the criminal activity that was perpetrated upon them because they didn't want to lose their lifestyle or freedoms that they have.
In this video, we will define intellectual and developmental disabilities and teach you how to listen, our method for conducting successful interviews with people living with intellectual and developmental disabilities.
This method is successful because interviewing individuals with disabilities can bring some complexity to it. So this method allows you to have a protocol, a standard way to approach it that is flexible to be able to meet the individual's needs. And I've seen this be really effective, especially in cases where people don't necessarily communicate in a neurotypical way, where interviewers following this protocol, following this approach, while having a standard protocol, have been able to make those adjustments needed to effectively interview the person in the most legally defensible, reliable way.
Throughout our video series, we recommend using a multidisciplinary team or MDT approach when investigating abuses and crimes committed against adults with disabilities. The MDT approach can be very effective for an adult victim with a disability. It endorses the use of one interview of the victim in the presence of all MDT members, utilizing the principles of a forensic interview. As you will observe in this video, one interview of the victim gathers the necessary information for both Adult Protective Services, or APS, and law enforcement investigators, and is available to all MDT members, while minimizing the trauma of the interview process for the victim and increasing the chance of a successful prosecution of the offender. However, recognizing that most interviews are not conducted using an MDT interview approach, we want you to recognize that many forensic interviewing principles can be utilized during an interview of an adult with a disability or an older adult. Forensic interview practices generally include building rapport to help put the victim at ease and to assess the victim's level of development and understanding, obtaining a narrative description of the event under investigation through open-ended questioning or specific non-leading or close questioning, asking follow-up questions to obtain clarification, and ending the interview on a positive note. At the Massachusetts Disabled Persons Protection Commission, or DPPC, an adult protective service agency charged with investigating abuses committed against adults with disabilities, we recognize the benefits of a forensic interview, and in partnership with district attorneys, local and state police, service-providing agencies, and others, we are working to incorporate the best practices of forensic interviewing for every investigative interview of an adult with a disability, in both the prosecutor-based MDT approach and any other interview by APS and law enforcement investigators that, by necessity, occur without a multidisciplinary team present.
During a forensic interview, we're focused on the victim communicating the information to us. When communicating, be sure to get at eye level and to communicate clearly. Ensure that they fully understand who you are and what your role is as an interviewer or investigator. My questions and my follow-up questions are based on what I'm being told, and a narrative conversation will develop. I'm following up on what is being shared with me by saying things like, "Thank you for sharing that with me. Tell me more about that." Or, "It sounds like a difficult thing to talk about. Tell me more about how this made you feel." By allowing the witness to express themselves in their words, it's how we'll get an accurate account of what happened. Rather than following a script and instead having a conversation, the answers to your questions will come with patience and by active listening.
While we are not forensic interviewers, many of us participate in the forensic interview process. For example, when there's a sexual assault allegation, we are part of the multidisciplinary team with the assistant district attorney and the victim witness advocate. A lot of what they teach us about the forensic interview process can be helpful. While going through the full narrative practice might be too lengthy for some of the people we interview, this method teaches us how to best try to elicit information from people who have different communication abilities. We have cases where people don't have expressive language capabilities and maybe use idiosyncratic signs. Knowing their personal signs and communication techniques ahead of time is helpful.
Before we go into detail on how to conduct an interview, we want to first take a moment to define intellectual and developmental disabilities. Typically, developmental disabilities begin before a baby is born, though they can manifest at any point during the developmental period until the age of 22. Developmental disabilities are thought to be caused by genetics, complications during birth, infections developed during pregnancy or in the early days of life, exposure to environmental toxins such as lead, or parental behaviors including drinking and smoking. Developmental disabilities can affect language, mobility, learning, self-help, and independent living. Intellectual disabilities are developmental disabilities that appear before a person turns 18 and results in mild to profound limitations in intellectual functioning and adaptive behavior. Those with mild limitations generally need minimal support, while those with profound disabilities cannot live independently and need constant support. It's important to keep in mind that not everyone who has a developmental disability has an intellectual disability. For the purpose of this video, we will provide you with techniques to interview people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Here are a few developmental disabilities that an interviewer might encounter. This list is not exhaustive, and it is not an investigator's role to diagnose anyone. However, having an understanding of the symptoms and potential impacts of a disability can help interviewers as they prepare to interview someone with an intellectual and developmental disability. Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder, or ADHD, is a disability that results in inattention, hyperactivity, and impulsivity. Autism spectrum disorder can affect how a person communicates and includes a wide spectrum of symptoms, typically associated with communication and social interactions, and includes former diagnoses of autism, Asperger's syndrome, and pervasive developmental disorders. Cerebral palsy is a group of disorders affecting a person's ability to move and maintain balance. Down syndrome is a condition in which a person is born with an extra chromosome, resulting in intellectual and developmental challenges. Fragile X syndrome is a genetic condition that can cause mild to severe intellectual disabilities, particularly in males. Angelman syndrome is a genetic condition that can cause developmental and intellectual issues, as well as seizures. Prader-Willi syndrome is a rare genetic condition that can cause behavioral problems as well as ongoing sense of hunger. And fetal alcohol syndrome is a series of conditions caused by exposure to alcohol before birth and can result in behavioral, learning, and developmental problems. Interviewers might encounter victims with other intellectual and developmental disabilities, and it's important to remember that each person is their own individual, and people with the same disability will have different abilities. The techniques we outline in this video aim to help train you to best interview people living with intellectual and developmental disabilities.
One of the strengths we teach our investigators during training is that people we support sometimes struggle to be clear and concise. So investigators need to not only ask the right questions and probe a certain way, they need to listen. A person's answer might not be explicit, but if an investigator takes the time to listen and be patient, to pick up again on some of the subtle and not so subtle signs during an interview, or how a person reacts to a question as they describe a person or a place or something that happened. While it might not be a verbal reaction or an answer to a question, those can tell an investigator just as much.
Don't assume what the person needs for communication. Always ask them what is their preferred method. Explain the process and steps of the interview. Let the person know that it's okay to take breaks when they need to.
As a best practice, it is important that we listen throughout an interview. People living with disabilities, their voices matter. To be prepared to actively listen, investigators should approach every case being as proactive as possible by learning as much as they can about the victim ahead of the interview to ensure they understand their communication abilities and needs. To effectively listen, investigators need to act with integrity, ensuring that in every investigation, they are respecting a victim's autonomy as well as their choices and decisions. Throughout each interview, we need to make sure that the victim knows their voice matters to us. Of course, safety is paramount throughout every investigation, including the safety of the victim and the investigator. Throughout your investigation and interview, always listen for any safety concerns. It is critical that we ensure our own safety and critical that we safeguard the victim's well-being, autonomy, and decision-making when it comes to safety. When we create a safe environment, victims recognize they can share their experiences openly and trust our team to do what is right. Our investigators understand that this process is difficult. We often meet people on the worst days of their lives. A trauma-informed approach to interviewing people living with disabilities recognizes the many emotions victims experience throughout the investigative process. Therefore, it's important that we meet them with sensitivity and support. A trauma-informed approach requires you to actively listen. Recognizing the difficulties and challenges, we need to be empathetic, meeting a victim where they are at, and tailoring an interview to meet an individual's needs. As we listen, we need to understand how victims use assistive devices, and we need to know when to adapt our communication. We need to ensure that in every interview, victims are given as much time as they need to understand and respond. And we are so much more successful when we work with and listen to our network. Here in Massachusetts, we are part of an incredible multidisciplinary team that gives us a network of support. Listen and lean on your network. When you lean on your network, you have a higher chance for a successful outcome, and most importantly, the victim, the survivor benefits.
For the remainder of the video, we will put these guiding principles into action by showing a mock forensic interview involving a victim of sexual assault. Here are the details of the case. The manager of a group home called authorities after discovering an employee of the facility in the bedroom of a 25-year-old female resident with limited intellectual capacity who utilizes a wheelchair. The manager reported finding both the female victim and the alleged abuser partially clothed. A subsequent visit to the doctor revealed the woman was pregnant. The alleged abuser is 20 years older than the victim and is not disabled. Because this specific case outlined in this training video involves an adult with an intellectual disability who is a survivor of a sexual assault, it is recommended to use a multidisciplinary team or MDT approach. The MDT approach, also designed for children, can be very effective for an adult sexual assault survivor with an intellectual, developmental disability. The individual in this case also may be referred to a sexual assault nurse examiner or SANE. SANEs provide specialized medical care and forensic evidence collection for survivors of sexual assault. SANEs undergo extensive training to provide compassionate care, conduct thorough physical examinations, and collect evidence for legal proceedings. SANES play a crucial role in supporting survivors and ensuring that they receive proper medical treatment and support following a traumatic experience. In this scenario, because it rises to the level of a criminal case, an MDT forensic interview would be conducted.
During a formal forensic interview, be transparent with the victims about what is happening. Share with them that the cameras are recording the session and microphones are sharing what's being said to the full multidisciplinary team, or MDT. The MDT is in a separate observation room, and the victim will not see or hear them during this process. The forensic interviewer may be wearing an earpiece to connect them with the MDT, or be taking a break during the forensic interview, which would be explained to the person at the beginning. MDTs generally include the assigned prosecutor, the assigned detective from the police department in the jurisdiction of the allegation, the investigator from DPPC, an advocacy center caseworker, and a victim witness advocate from the DA's office.
The benefit of the forensic interview is that it's done in a team format. It allows us to understand the individual and to understand whether they are going to be able to withstand the court process, which is very arduous for anyone, but even more so for individuals with developmental or intellectual disabilities.
For any investigation, prior to the interview, it's important to learn and prepare. That means reviewing and obtaining all documentation and necessary information related to the incident, including facts contained in dispatch, intake, or referral documents. Understanding the individual and how their diagnoses impact them. Dismissing any misconceptions and unconscious biases about persons with disabilities, and focusing on things that make us similar rather than different. It's also important to learn how the victim communicates, schedule the interview at a time that works for the victim, and prepare for any challenges that may arise during the interview.
Our multidisciplinary approach is part of why our investigations are successful. It is a team effort from the moment we receive a report of abuse against an adult with a disability. It starts at intake. To alert and initiate the team, a copy of the DPPC intake report is forwarded to an APS investigator and others as deemed appropriate. Once we have that intake information, the investigations manager and the investigator pre-plan and determine the next steps that need to be taken in partnership with the team. We work to gather the necessary background information, such as medical records, potential witnesses, previous incidents, and most importantly, we ensure the victim is safe and the appropriate services are available, such as SANE, rape crisis, legal aid, and therapeutic services. If we know that the person is receiving services from an agency, we connect with that service providing agency. We work as a team to gather as much information as we can based on the intake and information from the team, so we are prepared to go into that first conversation.
Investigators need to prepare by going through any documentation ahead of any interviews. This includes the intake report from DPPC, which often includes information as to whether the perpetrator or the victim has ever been the subject of a prior report, their living situation, and if there is a particular developmental disability or intellectual disability. It can also include school records, APS prior reports or records, and determining whether or not there have been any other investigations at the group home or site of abuse.
Throughout the process, it's key to prioritize integrity and safety. During this time, interviewers should prioritize making the interviewee feel safe. During the interview process, it is important to show that you are listening to the victim and that you are committed to their physical and long-term safety and protecting their privacy. Remind them that they are in a safe place and that they are not in trouble. Remind them that this interview is taking place to hear their side of the story and that it is okay not to guess the answer to a question and that they should not be afraid to say they don't understand a question or correct a mistake on the part of the interviewer.
It's important to make sure that the victim feels comfortable with the interviewer. The best approach is to start to know the person and to understand them. It's helpful to know about their likes, their dislikes, their abilities, their ways of thinking, and what they aspire to. And that is what you can tap into during the interview if you have any issues that arise. Interviewers can say something like, "You told me that you really enjoy making puzzles. How about you focus on that and let's work through this?" We are conducting investigations and interviewing people who may have also had previous trauma. Interviewers need to know if they may have been the subject of abuse before this particular incident. Having that information is important because we can meet them where they are and can understand that this person has gone through a lot and continues to go through a lot.
When it's time for the interview to start, introduce yourself and offer to shake hands, but only do so if the victim puts out their hand.
All right. Hi, I'm Jane Smith. I am a forensic interviewer with the District Attorney's Office. It's nice to meet you today.
Nice to meet you.
Inquire with the interviewee about what can be done to make the room comfortable. Indicate to the interviewee that they should say if they need any breaks. If they want a support person with them, let them know that they can join if they sit quietly with them. Be sure to point out any cameras and let them know if there are other people listening to the conversation. Try to make sure the interview is happening in a quiet environment without distractions.
So there's a few things that I want you to know about the room that we're going to be talking in today. The first thing that I want you to know is right up here, there's a video camera that's going to be taking our picture while we talk today. And there's some people who are watching in another room with the DPPC. There is Jeanette, who's an investigator, Cindy, the state police trooper, Linda, the victim witness advocate, Victoria, your DDS service coordinator, and Dave, the prosecutor. They're all going to be watching while we talk. And I have this special earpiece right here that lets me hear them if I forget to ask any questions of you along the way. Is it okay with you that they watch while we talk today?
I'm okay with that. They've been helping me.
Okay, great. The other thing that I want you to know is that I have this clipboard. And on this clipboard, I'm going to be taking some notes just so that I remember all of the things that you say while we talk today, because everything that you say to me is really important. So what do you prefer that I call you today?
Mary.
Mary. Okay, great.
Before getting into the allegations portion of the interview, interviewers should build rapport. Discussing neutral topics will help put the interviewee at ease and help you assess their level of understanding. Rapport also helps to develop a baseline for the person's abilities and what type of questions they can answer best.
Take your time. You don't want to appear rushed. Unfortunately, this is probably not the only person you will have to talk to today, but you need to give them time and let them share their story. Be present. When you ask a question, think about it like a 10-second pause to give the person time to process and time to answer before you start thinking of your next question.
One thing, you have to be calm. If you're not calm, the survivor is not going to be calm. Find out what they need. If somebody came in, I want you to get to know me first. Because you don't know me, I'm not going to talk to you. I want you to feel comfortable. If I don't trust you, that's not going to help me.
Before we get started, I'd like to learn some more about you. Tell me about the things that you like to do in your free time.
I like to cook. I'm a good baker.
What do you like to make?
Chocolate chip cookies. Everyone in my house loves chocolate chip cookies.
I really like chocolate chip cookies too.
You'll want the rapport building portion of the interview to continue until the victim is ready to move on to the allegations. It's at this point you'll want to lean into trauma and empathy-informed questions. Remember, when talking to people living with intellectual and developmental disabilities, it's important to ask clear, simple, open-ended questions, but do not infantilize them. Interviewers should always address individuals in an age-appropriate manner.
It is very important to be trauma-informed in these situations to ensure that we are fostering environments that are safe and conducive for folks with disabilities, especially because we are dealing with confidential and sensitive information. It also empowers people. Part of being trauma-informed is giving the voice back to those who might need that support.
It's very important for victims to have a say in the process and that we tailor the process to meet the victims where they are. These interviews can be overwhelming and confusing, so we want to limit that. We want to empower our victims, especially when someone has been victimized or sexually assaulted. It is important that we try to restore as much control as possible for that person. So we try to invite as much narrative as possible and give the witness all of the space and all the time they need to share their information with us. Active listening means listening more and talking less.
When you begin a forensic interview, part of the beginning is rapport building that will also function as an assessment. In this narrative practice portion of the interview, you get a baseline of the victim's abilities. While it may seem on face value that somebody with a disability cannot do narrative practice, it's always important to try. If someone has the ability to tell you something step by step, this skill can be utilized later when you ask them questions about what happened to them. Even for some neurotypical adults, saying something like, "Tell me about yourself," or "Tell me something from beginning to end," is too big of a question. So you have to break it down. During narrative practice, you're learning that person's conversation style and what questions are more effective than others. Open-ended questions are still the best option for non-leading, non-suggestive information, but rapport building and narrative practice helps you discover what question types will make the conversation successful.
Mary, there are some things that I always tell people when I talk with them. I want you to know that I'm here to listen to you and everything that you have to say.
Thank you.
I'm going to be asking you some questions today. So if I ask you a question and you don't know the answer, please just tell me that you don't know. I don't want you to guess.
That makes sense.
And if I ask a question that's confusing or it doesn't make sense, please tell me, and I'll try to make my question more clear.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
Okay. The next thing is that sometimes I make mistakes or I get things wrong. So if I get something wrong, I want you to correct me. If I ask a question and you don't want to answer, it's perfectly fine to let me know. We'll only discuss what you're ready to discuss. But if at any point you want to go back to something that we've already talked about because you've remembered an additional detail, don't hesitate to stop and let's discuss it.
Will do.
So before we get going, I want to check in with you to see how you feel about talking so far. How do you feel?
I'm fine. Thank you.
All right.
Be sure to use simple language and ask one-part, open-ended questions. If you need to ask a close-ended question, remember to use the recycling funnel model and circle back to open-ended questions.
The funnel model is a method that encourages interviewers to rely mostly on open-ended questions in the beginning of an interview. These are designed to tell us about the interviewee. These can include questions like, what do you like to do for fun? What did you have for breakfast? Tell me more about yourself. From there, interviewers can ask clarifying questions using the different question types. If a yes/no question is asked, interviewers are encouraged to recycle to the top of the funnel and ask a free narrative question immediately after.
Like I shared before, my name is Jane, and I'm a forensic interviewer. Do you know what I came to talk with you about?
Yes, I remember the conversation we had last week to set up to talk.
Tell me about the reason that I'm here.
One of the staff has been doing sex things with me.
Tell me more about the staff doing sex things with you.
He tells me that he makes people feel better when they are sad.
Who is it that has been doing sex things with you?
Jerry.
Did this happen with Jerry one time or more than one time?
More than once.
Do you remember the last time that this has happened?
I don't remember.
In the case of a sexual assault, it is important to know how many times the victim was assaulted and if it was recent enough to assess whether an evidence collection kit is appropriate.
So, Mary, tell me about the last time that Jerry did sex things with you from start to finish.
He came into my room to talk with me. He does that sometimes. And then he told me that he was feeling sad and that I could help him cheer him up.
And then what happened?
Then he started to take off his pants and he showed me his private parts.
And what happened next?
He laid me down on the bed and took my clothes off. That's when he did the sex thing with me.
At this point in the interview, the investigator will need to go into much greater detail to get more information from the individual and to confirm, to the best of their ability, exactly what happened and whether it was, in fact, a crime. Specifically here, it's important to get confirmation of what exactly they mean by sex things. Utilize the "what happened next, then what happened" format until the victim has come to the end of the story.
What happened after Jerry did sex things with you?
He told me that he wasn't sad anymore, but that if I told anyone, that would make him sad too. If I told anyone, would I get in trouble?
What makes you ask about being in trouble?
I just don't want Jerry to be sad. And I think that he will be mad at me for telling someone.
You know, lots of people that I talk to tell me that they think someone will be mad. Tell me about Jerry being mad.
Jerry is my friend, and I don't want him to be sad anymore or mad.
Thanks for telling me how you're feeling. Is it okay that we keep talking about this?
I just need a minute.
Okay. Take your time. Is there something that I can get for you?
A glass of water, please.
Okay. Let me get you some water.
It's important to observe cues and pause the interview at the victim's request. The needs of the victim should always be put first as you proceed with a trauma-informed approach to the conversation.
Be kind and supportive. Include the person and the entire process, and be honest. And start by believing the survivor.
Investigators should give them time to process, be patient, be on time, keep their appointment, do not cancel last minute, and ask if they want support in the interview or not. And if they have a service, like a therapy or service, they'll make sure they can be in there.
Are you feeling okay?
Yes, thank you.
Would it be okay if we continue talking?
Yes.
Okay, so you were telling me about not wanting to make Jerry feel mad. Describe what Jerry is like when he's mad.
When he is mad, he says we aren't friends anymore, and that makes him sad.
And what happens when Jerry's sad?
When he is sad, he won't bring me meals.
How does that make you feel?
Like I have done something to hurt him. I don't want to hurt Jerry. He is my friend.
Okay, thanks for helping me understand more about Jerry. Tell me more about Jerry bringing you meals.
That is something special. He does just for me because we are friends. And I do sex things with him when he is sad.
At this point, the interview will begin to wrap, and the interviewer should discuss the next steps to ensure their network is effectively supporting the victim and the investigation. It's important to confirm that the victim is receiving the necessary and appropriate resources to help them. Interviewers should check with their local communities on available resources.
It's so important for investigators to remember that they are not on their own and have access to such incredible resources like other investigators and supervisors who are always willing to help out, are always willing to give them the resources. Do not feel like you are on your own. We deal with such complex people and complex cases, and it is unrealistic to think that, especially for a new investigator, that you will know all the answers.
Thank you for talking with me today, Mary. Is there anything else that you would like to tell me?
No, that's all.
Do you have any questions for me about the things that we've talked about today?
Is Jerry going to get in trouble?
Mary, I believe you know that Jerry is no longer working at your residence. What he did to you was wrong, and it's never okay for staff to tell others to keep something a secret. And it's not okay for staff to rely on individuals to make them feel better. Mary, you did nothing wrong, and I'm proud of you for sharing your story with me.
I felt like I was doing something wrong. I'm glad Jerry's not working with me anymore.
I always want to let you know about the resources available to you throughout this process. My colleagues and I are available to help you with whatever you need.
Thank you.
When it is time to end an interview, ask if the individual has any questions, concerns, or issues. For instance, do they have questions or concerns about going back to their residence or being around an alleged perpetrator who could be a staff person? We aim to provide reassurance, but we have to be careful not to make promises. So, for example, state that we will pass along concerns or issues. One thing that is very important at the end of an interview is to move slowly out of the interview into a more relaxed manner of speaking and asking questions, bringing it back to their interests, such as, what are you going to do after this? Do you have any plans? Are you going out to eat?
What are you going to do for the rest of the day?
I was hoping I can bake some cookies for my friends. They always enjoy when there are cookies for after lunch or dinner.
Well, I hope you have a great day and that you get to bake some cookies. Thanks again for talking with me.
You're welcome. Have a nice day.
At this point, the interview ends. As mentioned, it's important to provide detailed information on available resources and on the next steps involving the investigation. Victims should never be left in the dark.
The investigators need to be patient, take their time, speak clearly, not be fast with people. If they cannot remember things, let it go.
Be patient with a survivor because they're scared and they just went through trauma, so they might not be ready to talk about it, and don't force them to talk about it.
An adult victim with an intellectual or developmental disability, more often than not, is capable of communicating information to an APS or law enforcement investigator about their abuse or crime. By incorporating the forensic interview techniques demonstrated throughout this training, you will enhance the quality and quantity of information obtained from the interview and, in turn, increase your understanding of the appropriate responses necessary to meet the needs of the victim and next steps in your investigation. So whether you are conducting an MDT investigation or responding to an emergency situation, when interviewing an adult with a disability, remember, all you need to do is listen. Learn about the case and proactively prepare for your interview. Use integrity and ensure the person you're interviewing knows that they are being heard. Prioritize safety and safeguard the well-being of individuals and their autonomy. Use a trauma-informed approach. Employ empathy, tailored to the individual's needs. And be sure to remember your network and that you are part of a multidisciplinary team that is knowledgeable and there to help. That concludes our lesson. For more information on how to interview people living with intellectual and developmental disabilities, please visit the DPPC website, which features more detailed interview tips. This video was produced by the Massachusetts Disabled Persons Protection Commission in partnership with the Building Partnerships for the Protection of Persons with Disabilities and Older Adults Initiative, BPI, Melwood Global, and the Model Consulting Group. This project was supported by the Administration for Community Living, ACL, U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, HHS, as part of a financial assistance award totaling $2,547,279.08, with 100% funded by ACL, HHS. The contents are those of the authors and do not necessarily represent the official views of, nor an endorsement by, ACL, HHS, or the U.S. government. Thank you so much for watching.